Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yusufullah here. So welcome everyone to a new video where we're going to parse a verse of the Quran. Not an entire verse, but a sentence. And this is in the story of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, when those two individuals came to him in the prison and they related to him their dream. One of them said that I see myself squeezing grape juice and turning it into wine. وَقَالَ الْآخَرُ, and the other said, إِنِّي أَرَانِي, verily I see myself أحمل فوق رأسي, carrying above my head خبزا تأكل الطير منه, bread from which birds are eating. So it's a fairly complex sentence. It starts with qala at the front. So when we analyze sentences, and we do this from very early in the book, the Stories of the Prophets book, we started from the 4th week. Like once we're done with the 3-hour workshop, or the equivalent of the 3-hour workshop in the premium program, we immediately start the reading book. And then from the first passage, we introduce the students to a particular method of parsing sentences, which we call the SIDR method, SIDR. So let me quickly walk you through the SIDR approach, and then we'll apply it to this particular sentence. The sentence is fairly complex, and there's a lot going on, but inshallah, by the end of the video, you're going to be able to appreciate this, and you're going to learn a lot. And you're going to learn at least 3 or 4 subtopics in grammar that would require a dedicated presentation, but I'm going to weave it into today's video, inshallah. For the benefit of the newer viewers, let me explain the process. So the process is the SIDR approach, SIDR. So the S stands for spot the hidden words. So we go from right to left and we count the number of words. And if there's any verbs, we need to be able to detect whether the verb is empty or whether the verb is carrying a pronoun. So very quickly, the rule in the Arabic language is that every verb must be followed by a fa'il, followed by a doer of the verb. Not before, it has to be after, physically after, either in the form of a noun or a pronoun, never both. So if I say ذهب زيد, which means Zayd went, ذهب is the fi'il and Zayd's the fa'il. Zayd's the one doing the going, Zayd went. If they ask you total number of words, ذهب زيد, the correct answer is 2. There's the dhahaba and there's the zaydun, and that's it. If I flip it and say zaydun dhahaba, Zayd went. It was Zayd that did the going, and I change it and I put the noun at the front, then this sentence is also valid. But if you look at in terms of the total number of words, the answer is not 2 anymore. Because remember, the rule is every fi'l must be followed by a fa'il, either in the form of a noun or a pronoun, never both. And since Zayd is preceding dhahaba, it can't be the fa'il. So you can't say Zayd is the fa'il coming first and dhahaba is the verb delayed and the two together connect and form a sentence. You don't do it like that. The reason is because it's invalid for the fa'il of a verb to precede it. It just doesn't happen. It's like invalid. So since dhahaba requires a fa'il and Zayd is disqualified, so we're going to say dhahaba is 2 words. It's carrying a huwa because on its own dhahaba can mean he went. So it could mean just went, and it could also mean he went. So the total number of words in Zayd and dhahaba is actually 3. And when we parse it, we say Zayd, we don't say Zayd is the fa'il coming first. We say Zayd is mubtada, and then the predicate is the fi'l along with its fa'il that's inside it, and the two together connect and form the khabar. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and count the number of words from qala. So ignore the waw at the front, from qala until minhu. Okay, and remember, if there's pronouns attached to prepositions, then they need to be counted as 2. So with that in mind, pause the video and count the number of words. So this is step number 1, spot the hidden words. Okay, so if you said 17, then you would be correct. So let me quickly walk you through how it's 17, and then I'll move on to the I, the D, and the R, the 4-step process. So qala would be number 1, al-akharu would be 2. And then we have inni, which is 3 and 4. The inna and the ya pronoun. It's 4. Arani would be 5, 6, and 7. Because the verb is ara, and ara on its own means I see. And the ni means me. I see me, in other words, I see myself. So that's 3 words. So we're at 7. Ahmilu would be 8 and 9. Because ahmilu is carrying a pronoun as well. And then fawqa would be 10. Ra'si would be 11, 12. Khubzan is 13. So we're at 13 words. And then ta'kulu tayru is 14, 15. and minhu is 16, 17. So the total number of words are 17. So that's step one out of the way. The next thing we do is we look at the sentence and identify. The I stands for identify, SIDR. We identify the major portions that these 17 words need to divide into. In other words, what's the smaller number that the larger number needs to fit into? And that would differ from sentence to sentence. So if you're dealing with a nominal sentence, and there's no verb in the front, like this is the well from which people drink during the days of Hajj, or this masjid which Ishaq alayhi salatu wasalam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام هو بيت المقدس. So that's a long sentence and there's a lot of words there. So depending on the sentence you have in front of you, the smaller number would be dictated by the kind of sentence. So if it's a nominal sentence, that smaller number will always be 2. So this is sort of done for you, you already know. Now the heavy lifting is not here, the heavy lifting. So we're moving through these steps quickly, the count the number of words step and the identify the smaller number that the larger number needs to fit into step. So if it's a nominal sentence, then you would expect it to be 2, mubtada and khabar. If it's a kana sentence, then kana sentence is always divided into 3 parts, regardless of the total. The kana sentence would divide into 3 parts. The first part would be the kana itself, and then you would have the ism of kana, which could be 1 word and it could be multiple words. And then you have the khabar of kana, which again could be 1 word and it could be multiple words, and it could also be a full sentence. You see? So this sentence is a qala sentence. It's starting specifically with qala. If it was starting with some other verb, like hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking, then the total number of major portions in a verbal sentence, the bare minimum would be 2, a fi'l and a fa'il. Beyond that, it all depends on how many details the speaker is choosing to disclose. And there's really no limit to the length of the sentence. 3 is quite common. So you'd have a fi'l, a fa'il, and you'd have an object. And sometimes you'd have a prepositional phrase which would be a 4th major portion. So verbal sentences vary depending on the meaning of the verb and depending on the amount of details that the speaker chooses to disclose. This is particularly a qala sentence. So qala sentences, now what I tell you here would be applicable to every qala sentence. Right? So this is the beauty of this. You get it right in one sentence, and then all other sentences like it are treated the same. So qala sentences divide into a fi'l, a fa'il, and the third part, technically, it's called maqoolah. It's not called maf'ul bihi, it's called maqoolah. Maqoolah means quoted statement. So over here, the 17 words would divide into 1, 15. So the 1 is the qala, the 1 is the al-akharu, which is the fa'il, and then the rest of the words is the quoted statement, we call it the maqoolah. So now what we do is we change the color of the marker. And now we're on the D in the SIDR process. So the S was spot the hidden words and count the total number of words, paying particular attention to words that are implied and understood or being carried within the verbs. Okay, and I give you the rule of how to detect that. So either the verb is followed by a noun. So qala, we never counted that as 2. We only counted qala as 1. The reason is because al-akharu is physically on the left side of qala and it's the fa'il. So qala, it has to be empty because the verb is either empty or is carrying a pronoun. So when is it empty? When the noun is present. When is it carrying a pronoun? When there's no noun or the noun is preceding. Like the Zaydun Dhahaba example I gave you. Following? So the I stands for identify the smaller number that the larger number needs to fit into. And then the D stands for distribute them properly. Distribute them properly. So we did that. It's 1, 1, everything else. So we had a larger number 17 and we had a smaller number 3 and we distributed them. We said 1, 1, 15. 1, 1, 15, right? So now we're on to the R. And the R in SIDR stands for repeat the process until every word has been accounted for. So we change the color of the marker and we say from inna until the end, the sentence, in other words, the maqoolah, which is a sentence. It just so happens that the maqoolah is a sentence in and of itself. So we repeat the process. And this time, the smaller number that the larger number needs to fit into is 3. The larger number being 15, and 3 being inna, the ism of inna, and the khabar of inna. Because every inna sentence divides into those 3 parts. So you see how this works? So we have inna, we have the ism of inna, which just so happens to be 1 word on its own, which is the ya. And then from ara until the end would be the predicate of inna, predicate of inna. Okay, so now what we do is we change the color of the marker once again. And we move into the khabar of inna, and we say the khabar of inna divides into 3 major portions or 4 major portions or 5? Pause the video. Think about this. Think about this. Okay, you can use the translation in order to help you. Ideally, the parsing should take you to the correct, accurate translation. That's why we do this. So we do this in order to reinforce the grammar we've learned in the previous sessions. And also, we do this in order to give us an excuse to introduce new grammar on a need and necessity basis. So wherever there's a need, I talk about. So there's a couple of important things in this sentence that I will talk about, inshallah. So for many of our viewers, everything I've covered up until now is probably quite elementary. And that's a good thing. Okay, because we need to be able to distinguish the things that we already know and we know clearly versus the new information that's being given. So I haven't yet started talking about some of the newer elements in this sentence. Okay, so where are we? So we've accounted for the top layer, which was fi'l, fa'il, maqoolah. And then we moved into the maqoolah and we said inna, ism of inna, khabar of inna. And then now we're focusing on the khabar of inna. Khabar of inna. And it starts with the verb. And the verb happens to be ara, I see. So now it's going to be a fi'l, a fa'il, and there's going to be an object. Because when you see something. So how do we account for all of the words from the ya pronoun until the minhu? Until the minhu. Because there's bread there. So part of what he's seeing is bread. But is he seeing the bread or is he carrying the bread? You see what's going on here? He's not seeing the bread, he's carrying the bread. So the bread is related to the carrying and it's not related to the seeing. You see? So this is called nested structure. So we're going, we're changing the color of the marker and we're nesting down in order to properly account for all of the words. Okay, so how do you do this? How do you do this khabar of inna? If you said 3, fi'l, fa'il, maf'ul bihi, then unfortunately that would not be correct. Okay, many people might have thought that it would be 3. And then between the ya and between the carrying, we do like Zayd came to me riding, which is a kind of phrase. Okay, so I'll introduce this phrase and then we'll get back to this. So basically, it's called a circumstantial adverb when you're describing the circumstance and the state of the one doing the verb or the one upon whom the verb is being done. Then in grammar, that's called hal. It could be one word, it could be a full sentence. When it's one word, it's in nasab. And the classical example is ja'a Zaydun rakiban. Zayd came to me riding. Ja'ani Zaydun rakiban. So ja'ani Zaydun rakiban is ja'a. There's the ni, which is the maf'ul bihi. And then there's the Zaydun and the rakiban together. Both of those two together are the fa'il and then further divided into dhul hal and hal. The dhul hal is the noun whose state is being described and the hal is the circumstantial adverb. In this case, the word rakiban. Right? So the total number of words in ja'ani Zaydun rakiban is 4, but then the smaller number is 3. So that means there's something there which is compound. Is it the fi'l? No, the fi'l is one word. Is it the maf'ul bihi? No, the maf'ul bihi is one word. It's the fa'il which is compound. In the example, Zayd came to me riding. So the Zayd and the riding together would be considered fa'il. So we draw a larger box and say Zaydun rakiban is the fa'il, and then we change the color of the marker and relabel dhul hal and hal. Dhul hal and hal. Okay, so many of you might have thought that in arani ahmilu fawqa ra'si, ara would be the fi'l and the fa'il being the ana, which is implied within the verb, and then from the ni until the end, you would expect that to be maf'ul bihi. And then you'd further divide the ni, not the noon, but the ya, and the carrying above my head, bread, all of that together would be the hal. But unfortunately, that's not correct. You're going to say, why not? Okay, so let me explain. There's another principle in grammar that says when a verb has a fa'il and a maf'ul bihi, which are two pronouns referring to the same thing. I'll say that again. Whenever the fi'l has a fa'il and a maf'ul bihi, and they're both pronouns referring to the same thing, then you have to insert the word nafs in between. So if I wanted to say I slapped myself or I hit myself, then I don't say darabtuni, I say darabtu nafsi. Darabtu nafsi. It's pretty common. If their fa'il and their maf'ul bihi are two pronouns, a rafa based one and a nasab based one, and they're both referring to the same thing, then you have to insert the word nafs. Just like English. In English, you don't say I hit me, you say I hit myself. Isn't that right? So over here, arani, it doesn't say ara nafsi, it says arani. So isn't that significant? The answer is yes, it is. So how do you account for this? Okay, so there's a subtopic in grammar which I would speak about briefly, just to the extent that we need it in order to parse the current sentence that we have in front of us. And the students will have been studying grammar for roughly 3 months by the time we're here. So in other words, we're not teaching this to students that are cold off the street. We're teaching this to students that are ready for it and that are anticipating it. So here's the principle. The principle is that within the Arabic language, there's a group of verbs, and there's 7 in that group, that their meaning is either believing or thinking or imagining. Believing or thinking or imagining. Alimtu, wa dhanantu, wa hasibtu, wa za'amtu, wa wajadtu, wa ra'aytu, and khiltu. Okay, I think I got them all. Now obviously, we don't need the whole list. We just need to understand the higher level concept here. These verbs are called the verbs of the heart. Their meaning is either believing or it's seeing. Now, most of them have 2 versions. They have a normal version and they have a seeing in the meaning of believing version. So when you see, you could be seeing with the eye, or you could be like, when you're awake, you're looking at something, observing. Seeing in the meaning of observing versus seeing in the meaning of believing. Like even in English. So when it's seeing in the meaning of observing, it would have one maf'ul bihi and the sentence would be complete. So, ra'aytu zaydan, in other words, absartu zaydan. So, ra'aytu in the meaning of absartu, absara yubsiru. It means to look. Now, the believing one would have 2 maf'ul bihis. So, it would be like, ra'aytu zaydan ghaniyan. I saw Zayd to be rich. In other words, I found and I believe and I'm convinced that Zayd is rich. So, Zayd is maf'ul bihi number 1 and rich is maf'ul bihi number 2. So, it's called verbs of the heart. So far, so good? Verbs of the heart. Okay, at any point, you can always pause, rewind, and rewatch again. So these verbs, they have certain characteristics that are mentioned in the books of grammar. One of the characteristics is if ever their fa'il and their maf'ul bihi are 2 pronouns that are both referencing the same thing, then you don't bring the word nafs in between. With all other verbs, you would do that. But with the verbs of the heart, you would not bring the verb nafs in between. In other words, it's permissible for the fa'il and the maf'ul bihi to both be pronouns referring to the same thing without introducing between them the word nafs. And it's valid. So arani now makes sense. Okay, so now if this was seeing in the meaning of believing, then this would be clear. However, when you look at the translation, it says, and the other said, verily I see myself carrying above. It doesn't say I believe myself to be carrying. It says I see myself carrying. So now this is a dream. And what happens in the realm of dreams, we can discuss this and we can have this conversation. Isn't that right? We can have this conversation and it would be a philosophical conversation. Bottom line is that this video and this lesson is a grammar lesson. It's not a philosophical discussion we're having here. So we have 2 of them that we know. We have the ra'aytu in the meaning of absartu, and that has 1 maf'ul bihi. And we have the seeing in the meaning of believing, which has 2 maf'ul bihis. Now the dream one, an argument could be made that it more resembles seeing with the eye. And an argument could be made that it's more to do with the believing one. But we don't need to get into that discussion. The fact that the word nafs is missing seals the deal. And this is now incontrovertible and it's unequivocal that the sentence divides into a fi'l, a fa'il, and 2 maf'ul bihis. A fi'l, a fa'il, and 2 maf'ul bihis. So the earlier parsing that we thought might be correct, fi'l, fa'il, single maf'ul bihi, further divided into dhul hal and hal, is not right. The correct way to do this is fi'l, fa'il, 2 maf'ul bihis. The first maf'ul bihi will be the ya pronoun, and the second maf'ul bihi will be ahmil until the end. Okay, so now you're gonna say, doesn't maf'ul bihi need to be a noun? Doesn't maf'ul bihi need to be either a noun or a phrase? So over here, ahmilu is the beginning of a new sentence. It's the beginning of the new sentence. So isn't that problematic? So we say normally it would be problematic. Okay, because if you remember in one of the previous videos, we analyzed the sentence, وَأَرَادَ النَّاسُ أَن يَسْجُدُوا لِلْأَصْنَامِ لِأَنَّهُ يَوْمُ عِيدٍ. And the people intended to prostrate to the idols because it was the day of Eid. Do you remember that? وَأَرَادَ النَّاسُ أَن يَسْجُدُوا لِلْأَصْنَامِ or لِهَذِهِ الْأَصْنَامِ لِأَنَّهَا يَوْمُ عِيدٍ. لِأَنَّهَا يَوْمُ عِيدٍ. So over there, أَرَادَ was the fi'l, الناس was the fa'il, and the rest of it أن يسجدوا للأصنام لأنه يوم عيد. All of that together was the maf'ul bihi, and there was an an there. And the whole feature and function of the an, and there's a video on this channel that talks about this, I'll link to it above. So it was maf'ul bihi. And we mentioned that maf'ul bihi is one of those roles that an ism can have within a sentence. The ism could be used in 22 different ways. Maf'ul bihi is one of them. So now every one of those 22, along with an ism, two words together connect and form the fa'il. Two words together connecting and form the maf'ul bihi. Two words connecting together and forming the mubtada. Obviously this is okay. Like, I mean, nobody would doubt that. It would just be a phrase, what we call a phrase. What is a phrase? A phrase is two or more words functioning as a single unit. Now that's important. Functioning as a single unit. So instead of one word as the fa'il, you'd have two or three words connecting together and forming the fa'il. Very common. Okay, now can a full sentence become a fa'il? Can a full sentence become a maf'ul bihi? Can a full sentence become a predicate? Can a full sentence become hal? Can a full sentence follow a preposition? Maybe, maybe not. You see this? Are you following this? So if you look at the 22 possible ways an ism could be used, there's a few of them that full sentences can indeed occupy those slots. And predicate is one of them. Like one of the earlier sentences in this book, it said, وَكَانَ آزَرُ يَبِيعُ الْأَصْنَامِ. And Azar would sell idols. Do you remember that? وَكَانَ آزَرُ يَبِيعُ الْأَصْنَامِ. So over there we have a kana, we have Azar, and we have three words. Physically it looks like two. يَبِيعُ الْأَصْنَامِ is actually three words. There's the يَبِيعُ, there's the huwa carried within يَبِيعُ, and then there's the al-asnam word. All three of those together are forming a full sentence, but then the sentence is في محل النصب. The sentence is in the place of nasb, and it's filling the slot for the khabar of kana. And over here, it was allowed, and there was no need to convert it. So it doesn't say وَكَانَ آزَرُ أَن يَبِيعَ الْأَصْنَامِ. That would actually be invalid. You don't bring an. But in the أَرَادَ النَّاسُ أَن يَسْجُدُوا, there was an there. So what's the difference? Because in أَرَادَ النَّاسُ أَن يَسْجُدُوا, the people intended to prostrate. يَسْجُدُونَ لِهَذِهِ الْأَصْنَامِ لِأَنَّهُ يَوْمِ عِيدٍ is a full sentence, and a full sentence cannot become maf'ul bihi. It needs to be watered down. It needs to be reduced into the meaning of the infinitive. And that an is called masdariyah. So the an masdariyah was brought for the maf'ul bihi, and the an masdariyah was not brought for the predicate. And kana azaru yabi'u al-asnam. So over here, we're claiming that arani ahmilu fawqa ra'si. Ara is the fi'al. Within it, there's a ana, which is the fa'il. And then ni is the first maf'ul bihi. And ahmilu until the end is the second maf'ul bihi, because verbs of the heart, this is how they divide. A fi'al, a fa'il, and two maf'ul bihis. So it could be 4 words, or it could be like 15 words, or 13 in this case, and those 13 words would need to fit into the smaller number. So the smaller number in this case is 4. Fi'al, fa'il, and 2 maf'ul bihis. So the question is, isn't ahmilu fawqa ra'si khubzan too large to become an object? And doesn't it need a converter? And why is there no an before it? It's a valid question. Okay, so pause the video. Think about that. Okay, so if you have a possible response, you can type it in the comments, or you could just allow me to explain it. Here's the deal. The deal is that the 2 maf'ul bihis for a verb of the heart are originally mubtada and khabar. They're originally mubtada and khabar. So Zaydun ghaniyun is a full sentence. Zaydun is mubtada, ghaniyun is khabar. Zayd is rich. You put a ra'aytu before it, it becomes ra'aytu Zaydan ghaniyan. So what was previously mubtada is called maf'ul bihi number 1. And what was previously khabar becomes maf'ul bihi number 2. Is that okay? Ra'aytu Zaydan ghaniyan. So now, if it's possible and if it's valid for a full sentence to become predicate, then it's also valid for a full sentence to become the second maf'ul bihi for a verb of the heart, which is what's happening here. In other words, no need for conversion. So at this stage right now, I guess pause the video, let me know. Like, how are you finding this? Are you finding it helpful? And are you picking up some new high impact grammar here? Okay, so let's continue. So we have our fi'l, our fa'il, and our 2 maf'ul bihis. So now from ahmilu until the end, we start all over, and we said how many major portions does ahmilu until minhu divide into? So again, pause the video. If you said 4, meaning the fi'l and the fa'il, ahmilu, fi'l and fa'il, that's 2 already. فوق رأسي, you're considering that a third major portion, above my head. And then the bread, you're considering that a fourth one. And the fact that the birds are eating from the bread does not make that a fifth one. Okay, which is correct. Because خبزاً تأكل الطير منه is a phrase. So all of that will be a larger box. خبزاً تأكل الطير منه. So you don't segment that at this layer. We change the color of the marker and speak about it further down when we're repeating the process. Because the end goal of all of this is to have every single word accounted for. So we're like 70% of the way there. So أحمل until the end, how many major portions does it divide into? So you probably said 4. Agreed? Unfortunately, that's not correct. The correct answer is 3. Let me explain. So we have, I carry above my head bread from which birds are eating. So that sounds a lot like 4. However, the reason this is incorrect is because above my head is the answer to the question where, not in consideration of the carrying, but in consideration of the bread. In other words, we're modifying the bread. So this is an example of a prepositional phrase or an adverbial structure. Prepositional phrases like lahu or minhu or fihi, something like that. Adverbial structure is like dharf, what in grammar they call a dharf, and it's also called a maf'ul fi. So the answer to the question when or where. So we don't ask the question, where am I carrying? I'm carrying above my head. No, you're carrying within the dream. The carrying is happening within the dream. Or the carrying is happening in the kitchen. Or the carrying is happening in the home or in the bedroom or wherever. So the فوق رأسي is modifying the khubz. Okay, so this gets us into a discussion called nested structures. And nested structures is an elaborate topic. And this is something that we teach in the 10th week of the course. And remember, this sentence, the students would be exposed to it in week 12. So by this time, nested structures will have already been taught via a presentation, similar to my 3-hour workshop, which is just presentations, teaching grammar. So what is nested structures? Nested structures is when you have a prepositional phrase or an adverbial structure and there's no clear verb in the vicinity to link it to. Or if there is a verb, then connecting it to the verb ruins the meaning. So what do? We have to follow a particular process in order to account for the prepositional phrase and the adverbial structure correctly. So let me give you an example. Earlier in the book, it said, al-quloob fi bi'rin fi tariqin. Throw him in a well in a path. So how do you parse that? We have the fi'l fa'il maf'ul bihi, throw him, fi'l fa'il maf'ul bihi, and then there's 2 prepositional phrases. There's the fi bi'rin and there's the one fi tariqin, but we don't say the sentence divides into a fi'l, a fa'il, a maf'ul bihi, and 2 prepositional phrases, because that would ruin the meaning. Because that would mean you have to cut him up into pieces, and some of his pieces you throw him in the well, and some of the pieces you throw him in a path, but that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that throw him in a well situated in a path. So the second prepositional phrase is actually modifying well, and it's not linking to the verb al-quloob. So over here, فوق رأسي is actually modifying the khubz, and it's not linking to the ahmil directly. Okay, does that make sense? So depending on the definite, indefinite value of the noun that's being modified, we say mawsool sifa or we say dhul hal hal, and there's ways of doing it. Like I can't give the entire discussion here in this video. But the point here is that if the prepositional phrase or the adverbial structure is modifying an upcoming noun, then that would be hal coming first. This is how they do it. And if you need further elaboration on what exactly that means, post in the comments and I'll be happy to elaborate. But I want to keep it simple here. So فوق رأسي and خبزاً together is the object for the carrying. So the second maf'ul bihi for ara. How many major portions does it divide into? The correct answer is 3. And they are number 1 fi'al, number 2 fa'il, and number 3 compound maf'ul bihi. And the maf'ul bihi divides into a hal coming first and a dhul hal delayed. The hal coming first is فوق رأسي, which is a maf'ul fi, connecting to an omitted word, to a mahdhuf. Okay, now, or you could just say ultimately. So فوق رأسي ultimately becomes the hal coming first. Now there's something that happens in between which I'm suppressing for the purpose of this video. Is that okay? So فوق رأسي is ultimately the hal coming first. And then khubzan until the end will be the dhul hal delayed, which then divides into mawsoof and sifa. Khubzan is mawsoof, and ta'kulu tayru minhu would be the sifa. And I think the rest of the sentence is pretty clear. You would say fi'l fa'il muta'alliq. Ta'kulu fi'l, at-tayru fa'il, and minhu would be the muta'alliq. Muta'alliq then further divides into jar majroor. Bread from which birds eat. So we have a noun, an indefinite noun, the word bread, being described using a full sentence. And since the noun at the front being described is indefinite, you don't need a alladhi or a allati. And I talked about this in a couple of my previous videos, that the relative pronoun, alladhi and allati, is only needed when the noun being described is definite. And the example is, هذه هي البئر التي يشرب منها الناس. That this is the very well from which people drink during the days of Hajj. So al-bi'ru allati yashrabu minha an-nas. Contrast that to the example we have here, khubzan. It doesn't say khubzan alladhi ta'kulu at-tayru minhu. It just says khubzan ta'kulu at-tayru minhu. Bread from which birds eat. So if they ask you where did the which come from, the correct answer is it's automatic. In other words, it just happens. And there's no need for a relative pronoun, because relative pronouns in Arabic are only needed when the noun at the front is definite. And there's a whole theory behind that I've explained elsewhere. Okay, so I taught this recently in one of the live classes, and we went through it and we walked through it, and I was explaining to the students about fawqa ra'si, and that fawqa ra'si, to consider it maf'ul fi for the ahmil is a mistake, and to take fawqa ra'si and make it hal coming first for the khubzan as part of nested structures is the correct way to analyze this. I already justified it for you earlier, like a few minutes ago I was talking about it. And because in consideration of carrying, the answer to the question where is not above my head, because the carrying is not happening above my head. The carrying is happening in the dream. Isn't that right? So what's actually above the head is the bread above the head. Okay, so now I'm going to verify that. I have this book here, big fat book. Look at this monstrosity. Okay, it's called نور اليقين معجم وسيط في إعراب القرآن الكريم. And this is a book that does i'rab of every single sentence. If you look at that, it does i'rab of every single sentence within the Quran, from Surah Al-Fatiha until the very end. So I've opened it here to this sentence. This is verse 36 in Surah Yusuf. وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَانِ. And two young people entered along with him into the prison. قال أحدهما إني أراني أعصر خمرا. One of them said, verily I see myself squeezing grape juice that becomes wine, or preparing wine. وقال الآخر إني أراني أحمل فوق رأسي خبزا تأكل الطير منه. And the other said, verily I see myself carrying above my head bread from which birds are eating. Okay, so now let's look what he says. Now, if he says فوق رأسي is مفعول فيه for the ahmil, then that would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Okay, so let's see what he says here. Okay, so inni arani marra i'rabu nadhiriha. He says inni arani, we've already explained how to analyze that. Ahmilu. And then he says fawqa dharfu makanin mansub. In other words, it's maf'ul fi. Fawqa is maf'ul fi. And then he says fi mahalli nasbin halun min khubzan. And then after you've handled it and called it maf'ul fi, you got to move forward, and you have to say ultimately it becomes hal coming first for the khubzan towards the end. Okay, and then later he says khubzan maf'ulun bihi mansubun li ahmil wal jumlatu fi mahalli nasb maf'ulun thanin li arani. Okay, I mean this is amazing. He's saying khubzan is maf'ul bihi mansub for the verb ahmil, in other words, the thing being carried, and then the whole sentence. In other words, ahmil incorporated all of. So he's going backwards. You see what he's doing? He's going backwards compared to the way we did it. So they go from right to left, and then they tie everything up as they move to the end. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. I feel for the beginners, the SIDR process is the best. So you count the number of words and you identify the smaller number that the larger number needs to fit into, and then you proceed to distribute them. And you repeat the process until every word has been accounted for. You see? So with the أحمل فوق رأسي, he says, والجملة في محل نصب مفعول ثانٍ لأراني. And the full sentence from ahmil until the very end is the second maf'ul bihi for the verb arani. وَجُمْلَةُ arani fi محل رفع خبر إن. And the sentence arani until the end is in the place of rafa as a predicate for the inna. وَجُمْلَةُ إِنِّي. And the sentence from inni fi محل نصب مقول القول is the maqoolah. In other words, the quoted statement. And quoted statements are considered in the place of nasb. Because sentences can either have a position in i'rab or they cannot have a position in i'rab. So that's it. So hopefully you found that valuable. Inshallah, if you want to get to a level to be able to parse sentences like that, then step number 1 is to go through the high impact grammar, where we talk about the total possible ways the ism could be used, and we talk about verb conjugation. And all of that has been neatly arranged for you, free on this YouTube channel. And I'll point to the video here. Watch the video, it's about 3 hours long. Get through it over the course of a few days. And inshallah, after that, you will be able to begin reading a book like this, like the Stories of the Prophets book. And if what I shared with you today inspired you, and you can see how this method works for you, then consider signing up for the premium program. And I'll throw a link to that as well in the description below. With that said, I look forward to speaking with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.